Authority. Tyson is well known to many of us, and I'm sure most of us have met Tyson before, and is the Assistant Director of Operation Improvement with the NDDA. Based in Europe, Tyson has a wealth of experience in horticulture, irrigation management and water options. Probably a good one to follow on from.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks all. So, as Mark said, I'm Tyson Milne from the NDVA. I'm actually had a change of job since I sent that through to Mark. I'm now the Director of River Operations for Murray Darling Basin Authority. So that's why I'm here talking today about river operations. And also I'll just point in the room as well, we've got Claire Winter sitting over there, who's a graduate with us in the Mildura office. So if you get the chance at the break, go and say good day and introduce yourself to Claire as well. Right, so first of all, I need to just put up a notice that as we are a federal government agency, elections can be held on the 21st of May if you weren't aware. And so we're now in a caretaker period, so until the results are known, we're not able to discuss policies or political matters. So I'm here today to talk strictly about only operational matters. And if you do have any questions of policy or political, come and see me after the 21st of May. I'm happy to have a chat. So today, a few things we'll go through quickly. First of all, a bit of an overview of the River Murray system and just what's where. Then we're going to talk about some recent conditions and how things have been looking, particularly over summer, which was quite an unusual one. And finally, we'll have a bit of a look ahead for what we might be in store over the winter. So first of all, here's a bit of a schematic of the River Murray system for you. And it's by colours. So first of all, this dark blue stuff here is the bits that we at the NDVA are responsible for and operate. So the key things we've got first of all up here is Dartmouth Dam, which is on the Minamita River, and that's really our key storage. Further down here we've got Hume Dam on the Murray, and Hume is our main operational storage, so that's where we make our day-to-day releases from to meet demands along the river system. Other key bits of infrastructure we've got as well is here at Yarrawonga Weir. This is another key point where we re-regulate flows and make release decisions. And finally up here as well we've got Lake Victoria, which even though it's a fairly small storage, it still plays a key role in buffering flows down the river. So these are the bits here that we as the NDVA are responsible for. In the orange here you'll see these are the bits that, of the New South Wales rivers which New South Wales operate and has responsibility for. You'll notice that the Lachlan River up there isn't shown connecting to the Murrumbidgee because most of the time the Lachlan doesn't connect through. It ends up in a big swamp just prior to entering the Murrumbidgee. It's only in really extreme events that it makes its way through. So the main ones we've got on the New South Wales side here is the Murrumbidgee, and also you'll see we've got the Darling River up here up to the Menindee Lakes. Now, as you probably noticed downstream there of Menindee Lakes, we've got the Murrumbidgee shown in, the Darling shown in two colours, orange and dark blue. That's because New South Wales always operate and maintain control of Menindee Lakes. However, there's some rules in the agreement that when certain triggers are met, that we as the NDVA have the ability to direct them to release water for the Murray. It's important to note though that we don't actually control Menindee at any time, and while we can direct them to release, we don't actually control day-to-day releases. So for instance, at the moment, they're releasing quite a bit of water out of the Menindee Lakes for flood mitigation purposes at the moment, because you're probably aware there's been some rain up north again and there's plenty of water on the way. But that's purely Water New South Wales making those decisions. We as the NDVA haven't called on any water from Menindee this year at all, even though it is above the triggers where we can, and that's simply because we haven't had the need to in the Murray system this year. So yeah, this is shown as dashed because New South Wales operate and control it, but we do have the ability to call on water when certain conditions are met. On the purple side here, we have the Victorian rivers. Up here we've got the Uplands, which doesn't really have any major storages on it. There's a couple of little ones up the top, but nothing major, so that's pretty much an unregulated river. Then we've got the Broken and the Gold and the Campaspe and the Loddon, etc. through here. And finally, the last thing to note as well is our dark blue line ends at the border with South Australia, and that's because South Australia are responsible for operating and managing the river once it gets downstream of the border there. So we as the NDVA operate the river. We really operate it here from Dartmouth and Hume all the way through to the South Australian border, and from that point on we deliver through a volume over the border every day to South Australia, and they operate the river and manage it from that point onwards. So that's a really quick overview of the River Murray system and how it works and who does what. Now to move on to the current conditions, and really it's a story about what's happened particularly over summer, but how we got to where we are at the moment. Probably the first thing to note here, this is from July to March, and this is just showing how wet it's been in various places. Probably no surprise where we are, it's been average to maybe just above average. It hasn't been overly wet, but as you're probably well aware from the news events right the way down here along the east coast and the eastern side of the basin, it's been very much above average. In some places it's been the highest rainfall ever recorded. Although you'll probably note as we come into here, this is where our key catchments are, particularly up in here. That really heavy rain has only just extended into our catchments and hasn't come down and covered the full catchments. It's really only the Upper Murray. So while it has been wet, most of the rain has actually been further north on the eastern side of the basin. But that is also where most of the headwaters rise to. So that's what we had in over the last 9-10 months. So this is where we're currently sitting. I'll try to keep those same colours as before, just so you can see whose storages are which, but this is the level in each of the different dams. Hume Dam here, we're sitting at about 86%. We were sitting in January, we're at 99%, which is effectively full. Our dams, we call them effectively full when you're at 99% capacity. So that was it's only the fourth time since the 1960s when Hume was expanded that Hume has been effectively full in January, and the first time since I think it was 1994. And coincidentally, that was only a month after I stepped into the role of Director of Operations, so I'm not even going to take credit for it because it's not much fun managing full dams over summer, believe me. Next up here we've got Dartmouth, which is sitting at about 93% at the moment. And Dartmouth has just been slowly but surely creeping upwards. So we've just had nothing massive, but just reasonably good inflow events up there, a series of them. And because Hume's been so full, we haven't needed to release any water from Dartmouth down to top up Hume. So Dartmouth has just been slowly creeping up and continues to. Let's skip on to Lake Victoria here, just over half full at the moment. That's actually deliberate because we operate to what's called the Lake Victoria operating strategy, and we actually, if you've ever been there, it's sort of it's a shallow bowl and wind action, etc. really damages up on the bank. So what we try to do is pull the level down over this autumn-winter period and then refill it in spring when we get the high inflow period. So we operate to what's called the Lake Victoria operating strategy. We are actually actively bringing that storage down at the moment. Knowing that there'll be sufficient water in transit over winter spring, which is really when we get our peak inflows to refill it. Menindee here is a bit of an interesting one. I've actually shown it going under there. I wasn't quite sure how to show this, but Menindee has a capacity of about 1,830 gigalitres, but it does have the ability to surcharge that by an extra, about 200 gigalitres, 200 or 300 gigalitres. It's 300. So Menindee can actually be surcharged for short periods above full supply, and that's where we're at the moment. We're about 150 gigalitres above full supply, and Water New South Wales are managing that in line with the water that's coming down at the moment. So yeah, Menindee, we're full plus a little bit. Burrinjuck and Blowering are the two storages up the top of the Murrumbidgee, and they are both in the high 90s. It's just been continually wet up there. And I think they're still actively releasing water from those storages as well to try to gain some airspace. So the Murrumbidgee, Burrinjuck and Blair are effectively full. But the only storage in the southern, major storage in the southern basin that isn't full is Lake Eildon on the Goulburn. So that's of not so much relevance to irrigators here on the Murray. I think they're in the low 80% at the moment, but they're actually looking at the possibility that storage might fill this year too, which I don't think they've actually filled that storage since the 90s, I don't think. Not 100% certain on that, but I do know there's a fair prospect that there might be a spill near them this year, which hasn't happened for some time. So another one here, just trying to show you, this is it yesterday. Some histories of so where the two dams, major dams on the Murray have been as of yesterday. So this is where we're sitting. Dartmouth full is about 3,800, so about there, and Hume is 3,005 is full. So we're pretty, that line there is full of Hume. So what sticks out from here is there's probably 2 years that are pretty similar to where we are right now as of yesterday. That's 2012 and 1993 were probably the most similar. So what happened in both of those years? 2012, we actually we went over channel capacity a few times downstream of Hume, but we only had really minor flooding around Albury. So 2012, even though we had quite high dam levels at this time of year, we didn't have major flood events. The other one up there as well, 1993. In that case, we were above channel capacity downstream of Hume for quite a number of months, and we got to about moderate flooding at Albury. So both of those years, even though the dams are quite high, we had some only minor to moderate flooding. Contrast that to 2016, where you can see the dam levels were quite low. I think we're only about 19% at Hume at this time of year. And yet we ended up peaking having just below major flood level at Albury. So I guess the point of showing you this is twofold. One of them is that at the moment the dams are really quite high compared to they would normally be. It was only really in the last 30 odd years, there's really only 2 years that are similar. But also pointing out that just because the dams are high now doesn't mean we're going to get flooding over winter spring. In both of those years where they were similar, we actually didn't have major flood events. Yet, for instance, 2016, where the dam was almost empty at this time of year, we ended up having major flooding. So just things can go either way. Now, one question we've been getting a bit from down this way of late is we've heard how wet it's been, but we've been seeing floods down this neck of the woods, and people have rose 2016 quite a bit, which is a fair question. 2016, we did have inflows were slightly higher, but not by a huge amount. Up in this neck of the woods, so up in the headwaters. So a couple of slides here that's been put together from our environmental team, which actually answers that quite well. So I'll just step through those quickly. First of all, this is our releases from Hume in 2016 and 2021. So probably the key difference here is we had that big event in October. And just take note of that, the releases got to just under 80,000 metres a day, about 75,000 metres a day. So just take note of that number for a second, we'll come to that in a second. But as you can see, through this sort of September-October period, our releases were higher out of Hume. We did have a peak in start of December. Coincidentally, that was the day I started in the job. So I picked a really good time to do it. But that's what we released out of Hume this year compared to 2016. Now, if we go to the next slide here, these are releases downstream of Yarrawonga, and that's really where the big difference is, or one of the big differences this year compared to 2016. In that last slide, we were releasing from Hume was about there, just below 80,000 metres a day at this point, and yet releases downstream of Yarrawonga were 100,000 metres a day more, 180,000 metres a day. And there's the key driver of that is there's two rivers that come into the Murray downstream of Hume before Yarrawonga. There's the Kiwa and the Ovens, and in this particular event it was really, both of those contributed, but the Ovens really drove it. We had a big inflow event from the Ovens, and that added 100,000 metres a day to our peak that we haven't seen this year. So that was one of the drivers, but if we just keep moving downstream, the next one here is the Goulburn River as well. Which comes in below the Barmer Choke, and that also has a bit of an impact as well because the Barmer Choke tends to hold the water up and attenuate that peak, whereas the Goulburn goes straight into the Murray downstream. So again, you can see we peaked about 50,000 metres a day inflows from the Goulburn, whereas this year the most we got to was about 15 early, and we've just been plodding away. So we haven't had a lot out of the Goulburn this year. Next up is the Murrumbidgee as well. Again. This is a little bit later that peak happened, but that actually fits in quite well with your travel times to when this water actually arrived. But you can see there we peaked a bit over 30,000 metres a day. Actually looked this up because there's been a fair bit of, we had a fair bit of flooding up around Wagga, Gundagai, etc. this year on the Murrumbidgee. So I was actually curious as to why it was that we actually had such high inflows there. Turns out they got to about 90,000 metres a day at Wagga, which must be a fair bit of water up that neck of the woods in 2016. This year they only got to about 50. But just by the nature of the Murrumbidgee and its junction, unless you've got a really big flow coming, got high water in the Murray, plus water coming out of the ditch, instead of entering the Murray, it just tends to back up all around this area, around around Balranald, etc. You tend to get back up rather than getting that flow coming down. So it must have been a really big flood to actually push through the Murray at that event, at that level. So what all that adds up to, so this is downstream of Euston Weir. We got to a bit over 110,000 downstream of Euston Weir in 2016. As opposed to this year, the most we got to was just under 40,000. So that's probably about enough to get water into Chalk Creek and into Hatter naturally. That's sort of just below 40,000 mark. So it's not as if we didn't have some type of flood of water going over bank. But if you remember 2016, and I definitely did, I was working down at Caradoc at the time, and one day when we were going to farms down at Glen, and we called it at every bend on the way, and all of them, the water was up to the gate. You couldn't even get into the, you couldn't get down to the river flats at all. So that's that difference there, what 100,000 metres a day makes versus 40. There was one key difference though this year, and that was what's coming in from the Darling. And in 2016 there was really no contribution from the Darling at all, whereas this year, as we just touched on briefly, we spent a fair bit of water in Menindee. These slides only went to the end of the year. This keeps going up a little bit further, but it's about at this point as well, the water starts naturally flowing down the Great Darling and a branch there on the Darling as well. So we I think we topped around about 14,000 metres or so at the Tundi this year, which is a fair bit more than what happened in 2016. And finally, put all that together, that ends up our flow at the South Australian border, which this year we've got to just under 40,000 metres a day at our peak, whereas in 2016 we got to nearly 100. So that's in a nutshell. Hopefully that's explained, because we do get that question quite a bit down here, why haven't we seen big floods this year when it's been raining? And that really just goes to show it's not just the amount of rain, but it's what rivers those inflows come from, and it's timing as well. But just another slide as well to really show the difference. This was 2016, and you can see where those areas of higher rain were. They're mainly around sort of the mid-Goulburn, so that water's going to flow in downstream of Eildon, but it's still going to come down through the Goulburn, the Ovens and the Kiewa, and a bit up in the Murray, whereas here, the heavier rain was mainly upstream of Hume Dam, and so that's been captured in Hume or in Dartmouth as well. So that's really just a quick overview of that question, why it is. And so it's not just how much rain, because we had similar amounts, but it's also where it falls and when is what determines what happens in our neck of the woods. So with that, quickly go into looking ahead. First of all, I'm sure you're probably aware that all of the states have made their allocation forecasts, and most of them are forecasting they'll open on either full or fairly high allocations. So I'm sure everyone's seen that as well already. But really, we'll just quickly go on to what the outlook is looking like in terms of rainfall, and then what that looks like for inflows. So this is the most recent forecast from the Bureau for the chance of exceeding median rainfall between June and August. This has been updated recently and gave us quite a fright when we saw it, because it wasn't looking like this 2 weeks previously. So this is really, but what they're telling us is that for much of the basin you're looking at 75, 80% or more greater chance of exceeding median rainfall. It's important to note that an 80% chance of exceeding median rainfall doesn't mean that it's going to be wet. It means there's if they make that same forecast 5 years in a row, 4 of them will be more than average and 1 of them will be less than. So you've basically got a 1 in 5 chance to be drier than average, 4 in 5 chance to be wetter than average. So just to take that in mind, just because we're seeing this doesn't mean it is definitely going to be wet. There's a fair chance it will be, but it doesn't mean it will. Just interesting to note down here as well, even though it's still much higher than average, over our key catchments, which is really this area here for the Murray, we're getting back down to a more 60 to 70% chance as opposed to that 80%. So in all likelihood, it looks like it's pretty likely it's still going to be wet, but it may not be quite as wet as it's going to be in other parts, judging by that. And also noting this is June to August. Our key inflow months are August, September, October. So this is really the lead into our inflow months. And we'll be watching pretty carefully the forecast for August to October, because that's traditionally when we get the bulk of the inflows to the River Murray system. However, if it is wet in the lead up, that just means that our catchments are going to be primed and everything is going to be ready to go if it is wet, or even if it's only average. So the last little bit is just having a look at what the Bureau are predicting for stream flows Don't worry too much about the numbers in here. Probably the key one to look is this April to June, both inflows to human, inflows to Dartmouth. And you look at the rough numbers, there's probably 3 times the chance that it's going to be high flows than there is low flows into human. And there's about 5 times as likely that there'll be high inflows than low inflows into Dartmouth. So again, it's not telling me there's still a 1 in 10 chance that there will be low inflows, but it's much more likely in both of those key storages for this region that it's going to be higher inflows than lower. And the last bit, we've just some similar stuff as we talked about earlier, how important rivers like the Kira and the Ovens are to what actually happens down in the woods in terms of seeing high rivers and flooding. Pretty similar story here. Again, we're looking at roughly 5 times the chance that we're going to have high inflows and we will low inflows out of both of those river systems as well. So if you're keen to see some water up in the floodplain around this part of the world, which I know a lot of people are and we get a lot of questions about, we can't make any promises, but in terms of the forecast, it's looking like it's fairly likely that we're going to have high flows. So with that, I might stop for questions.